Hey, everybody, and welcome to Confirmation. This is, of course, not how any of us had anticipated things starting, but I am excited in whatever format we're using to be able to join with you in this confirmation journey. So welcome to you students, also welcome to you parents, as we are all gathering together to try and make this work. This year, the focal point of our confirmation, as we have talked about in the past already, is the Bible narrative or the story of the Bible itself. As we begin, I'm going to introduce you to something that normally we would do together in class. We've actually got two things. One is an opening prayer, and then the other one is talking about our highs and lows. Now, kids, you'll start to determine whenever it is that we begin to gather back in person again, that we typically will do two prayers. We do an opening prayer, and then we do a closing prayer. And I'll give you a big hint. The opening prayer is the easier one to do because it's always written out. Now, the highs and lows, this is just a time for you to kind of share, this is what's been great this past week, and this is what's not been so great this past week. It's a time for us to just share and open up and what's going on in our lives. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go into share my screen. And I'm going to pull this up right here. And now here is the opening prayer. So folks, I'm going to ask you, kids and parents together, put me on pause. I want you to, this right here, you can see the opening prayer. Go ahead and pray that together and then talk about those highs and lows together. What's been good, what hasn't been so good. So put me on pause and do that, and then come on back and hit resume. Okay, hopefully you did it. I'm going to trust you did. Going to pull me back off screen share now, and we're going to go ahead and get going. So this week will be slightly different in that I'm going to do a little bit of introduction. That's this video that you're watching right now. And then we will have a separate video that's going to kind of talk about the lesson itself. And that in combination with a few discussion questions that I'm going to give you that you can all talk about together. Then you can send that back to me. And later on in the week, I will give a response to that. I'll either do a written response or maybe I'll do a brief video response that will kind of tackle whatever questions you might have or just give some feedback on what you share with me. So that's what we can expect this time. All right, the Bible. What is it? Folks, here is my confirmation Bible. I got this the day that I was confirmed in 8th grade, clear back in 1995. It was a really long time ago, but I've had this Bible ever since. I also have many other Bibles. Blame the day job. I just have a lot of them, but this is my confirmation Bible. Now, let's think about it. The Bible itself. Is it just one big story? What do you think? If I was to answer that question, I would say both yes and no. I think the Bible is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but let's take a look. If you've got your Bibles, I want you to pull them out. If you don't have it with you, put me on pause and go grab it. And if you don't have one at your house, let me know and we will get you one, or we can help you find one. So for starters, the table of contents. Most books have these. They list chapters or whatever. And so there's a lot in there, isn't there? I mean, it's a big book if you look at it. And I've got some Bibles that are bigger than this one, but there's a lot in there. And so let's think about each one. Typically, we call each one of those little headings a book of the Bible. So what does that sound like? Do they sound like chapters or sections? What do you think? I think they're all different parts that all add up to one big thing, but it's really interesting as we really start to break it down. How many testaments are there? Have you heard that word before? A testament? There's two. We've got the New Testament and we've got the Old Testament. Or maybe I put those out of order. We've got the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, the Old Testament is also sometimes called the Hebrew Scriptures. It's actually the holy writings for the Jewish faith, and it's a part that we share in our Bible as well. So that's what we call the Old Testament. And then we got the New Testament, which focuses more on Jesus and the growth of the early church, the Christian church, I should say, and how they all fit together. So that is what they all come into. And then we've got all these different writings of, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Those are the first ones of the Old Testament. We've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts, and a whole bunch of letters and such in the New Testament. There's 66 books of the Bible. We call them books, as I mentioned a moment ago. So what is it? What is the Bible as a whole? When I think about it, I think it's kind of a library. And think about a library. A library is just full of all kinds of different books, right? And there are all kinds of different writings, and there are all kinds of different stories, and there are all kinds of different stuff. The Bible is the same sort of thing. It is a library of different types of writing. Now, it was recorded on 3 different continents: Asia, Europe, and Africa, or what we would consider those today. It was written originally in 2 different languages. The first one is Hebrew, and folks, here's what Hebrew looks like. You can kind of see Hebrew is a really, really strange looking language. Doesn't really look like much of anything. And what's really different about it is you actually read it right to left. So where we're used to reading left to right, you read it backwards. So it's a really interesting language. But that's what the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures was originally written in. And then the New Testament is written in Greek. Now you can see Greek here. It's Greek and then English over on the other side. Hopefully you can make that out. Greek is an interesting looking one too. It looks perhaps a little bit more, in terms of what the letters look like, a little bit more what we might be used to, but it's a much newer language compared with Hebrew. So that's the 2 languages that the Bible was written in. Now, every once in a while, you'll also get a 3rd language of Aramaic, which was what they spoke when Jesus was walking around. It was kind of the common language, but everything was written down in Greek. So with a very few little exceptions, it's those 2 main languages. Sometimes when we think about the Bible, we tend to think that it was just God basically reached down and handed it to us and gave it to us, or God had a pen and directed how we write it. But the Bible, as we know it now, was actually compiled, all the different writings, over the course of a couple of 1,000 years. So it covers a whole bunch of human history in terms of the earliest writings versus the later writings. And in its current form, as we have it now, as this one is presented and every other one that I have as well, it was actually brought together about 500 years ago. So there was a whole bunch of other writings as well. Sometimes I've read some of them and I've been exposed to some of them, but there was a whole bunch of different writings that were considered scripture. And about 500 years ago, there was this great big council that came together of different churches and such, or different people from the church, I should say. And they went through all these different criteria. And I'm not going to list the criteria because it's a great big, huge, long list, and it's kind of really weird to understand. But they went through all these different criteria to determine what are we going to include in the Bible and what are we not going to include in the Bible. And throughout the course of that long process, they put it together into what we now know as the Bible. So I've got a question for you now. And as I read the question, then I want you to put me on pause and talk about this together. Here's the question. What or who do you think the Bible is about? The story of the Bible. What do you think it's about? Go ahead and put me on pause and talk about that together. Did you talk about it? I hope you did. Okay. When I think about the Bible and who it's about, I think it's about God, and I think it's about humanity, and I also think it's about the world as a whole. And that's the whole thing together. Now, the Bible itself can be a topic of hot debate. It seems like everybody's got their opinion on it. Some like it, some don't. Some like parts of it, some don't like parts of it. So everybody's kind of got their own opinion. Everybody's got their own interpretation, all kinds of stuff. But when I think about the Bible, I think that the narrative as a whole, and the Bible as a whole, because remember, there's different types of writing in there, I think it gives us an honest look at what it's like to be human in the midst of a broken world, but also reminds us that God is active in this broken reality. Now, sometimes you'll hear me talk about a 4-chapter story of what the Bible narrative reveals to us. And I heard it this way once, and I really kind of liked it. So I want to share this with you. Hopefully you find this helpful as well. Chapter number 1, God made it. Chapter number 2, humanity messed it up. Chapter number 3, Jesus redeemed it. And chapter number 4, we are invited into the work of reconciling it all together. That work which is ongoing and not yet finished. As we move through the narrative itself, as we spend this year working through stuff, working through different stories, we're going to hit some stories, we're going to miss some stories just because of the available time to us. And I'm going to try and give you different ways of thinking about each story that we look at. But I want you to make up your own minds about things. Remember, it's open to interpretation. My way that I think about it isn't necessarily the right way that you have to think about it. So that's going to be the invitation. As this one's wrapping up now, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and move over into our second video in which we're going to tackle the story of creation.